And so we should reestablish the connection between merit and reward. If you're doing something creative and important that helps people, I think you should be rewarded. And if you're some bureaucrat, if you're teaching a really interesting course on ancient history in a liberal arts college, you should make the most. It should not be the administrator who's figuring out how to comply with the ADA in the bathrooms. It just should not be. And yet it is. And that's like society-wide. So I don't know how I got off on this, but I really feel it.
Well, in one part of the financial sector, from payday lending,
that's
all I had to say.
All three Abrahamic faiths, monotheism worldwide, detests usury. And that's lending money at interest. And that's like, if you say that out loud, that's like more controversial than like anything you can say. What are you, a socialist? Yeah, I'm a socialist. Yeah, I'm a big socialist, okay. No, I just don't know why, if the mafia, well, they used to lend money at 22%, you need to go to jail. It's a federal crime. It's loan sharking when they do it. And they had like pretty easy terms, by the way, compared to, I don't know, Citibank. Charging 22% on interest on credit cards. And I always bring this up with people, and they always look at me like I'm a freak, like they expect me to endorse Hugo Chavez or something. And I'm like, no, I'm opposed to socialism. I just don't know why I'm supposed to think that's good. I don't think it's good. And, you know, you often hear people talk about, you know, the American middle class and it's dying and all their problems and the price of eggs and all that stuff. And it's like, if you actually talk to middle class people, I'm not a middle class person, never have been one, but I know some, and I'm interested because I think you need a middle class base in your country. You need a majority middle class country in order to have a democracy.
Definitionally.
Definitionally, that's exact. People with a rooted stake in the country with a future here, not renters, owners, you know, small owners. And that's the basis of any healthy society, and we're losing it. It's less than 50% now. And if you actually ask them, like someone who makes 75 grand a year with 2 kids, like where are your actual expenses? What do you actually worry about? It's, of course, it's mortgage and credit cards. And it's really, at this point, credit cards, because a lot of people can't even afford to own. So I think that's a huge problem. I'm not exactly sure how to solve it, but as a professional talker, I believe, and as a Christian, I believe.
We're not even allowed to like criticize.
But that's the point. Saying the truth out loud. In the beginning was the word. Saying the truth out loud is the first step toward fixing things. And
the spoken truth.
And the spoken truth. The spoken truth. That's exactly right. And so, and by the way, that's my job. I mean, I'm not an economist. I couldn't balance a checkbook, assuming there even are checkbooks, and I wouldn't know because I don't handle money in any way. So like, I'm totally ignorant of economics from beginning to end. But I am interested in people, and I talk to a lot of them, and it's credit card debt that torments people.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, it's worth asking, is there a good reason for that? You know, credit card debt is one of the very few forms of debt that's not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Now, why is that? Well, I happen to know because I was there. That was made law in the bankruptcy bill, and that was led by Joe Biden, who later became the worst president in the history of the country. But at the time when he was sentient, he was, of course, representing Delaware. Wilmington, Delaware,
corporate center of the world,
was the credit card capital of the country. And in exchange for adding that to the bankruptcy bill, that you can discharge all kinds of debt, medical debt, all kinds of personal debt, like your landscaper. You don't have to pay your landscaper in a bankruptcy. You don't have to pay your caterer. You don't have to pay your builder. They all get shafted. Credit card companies, you have to pay them. Like, how'd that happen? Well, it happened. They gave Joe Biden a house. Look it up. That's a fact. That's corrupt. But it had this effect. And I brought this up like 1,000 times when I worked at the TV channel. And I never had one person, they'd always look at me like, were you criticizing the credit card companies? I think they're on our side. Like, don't criticize the banks. And it's like, I'm not saying I hate the banks or we should shut them down, though it's a thought. But I mean, I'm open to it. I'm kind of shutting down the banks agnostic, leaning toward, but whatever. I'm not sold on the idea, but I do think it's worth a conversation. And why do we never have that conversation? Ever, 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 ever. And the fact that they're sending credit card solicitations to college students. Nothing wrecks your sleep, nothing can hurt your marriage more than debt, faster than debt. I would say it's a bigger problem than sexual infidelity, which gets a lot of attention, which is bad. I'm not endorsing that either, obviously. But I'm saying if you were actually look at the numbers on why people get divorced, debt is a bigger driver of divorce than sexual infidelity. And it's driven in this country primarily by credit cards.
But look, debt is the slavery of the free. The entire financial system is leveraged. Everything from the federal budget to how hedge funds operate to how we finance even the most simple things. I mean, you could go a step further and say the entire American economic project is on credit.
Well, I don't think that's a stretch to say that, because it is. And it's a habit of mind, by the way, that is a relatively new development in the Christian world and in the Jewish and Muslim world. I mean, again, this was
it's
a
one
precept
of the 613 laws of Judaism.
Exactly. And it was, not allowed at various times during the Dark Ages, which are actually pretty light, it turns out, but another story entirely. It's one of those things that, was the basis of like American politics for a long time. I mean, political leaders 150 years ago, really up until, the First World War, constantly talked about things like monetary policy, the banks, and debt, as you know, just as students of political history. And now it's totally vanished in favor of identity politics, race war, gender war. And that's, of course, intentional, right? Fight amongst yourselves, hate each other on the basis of characteristics that never change, immutable characteristics, so you won't notice that the country's being looted. And I had an idea the other day that was not at all popular with the people I mentioned it to. They thought it was crazy, but I'm going to say it again because I kind of like it. It would be kind of fun to have a political party that was like the credit card party. And the only requirement for membership of the party would be that you would pledge at a certain date in the coming year to stop paying your credit card bills. And if you had, say, 100 million people in that party, it's sort of the old line about how you're afraid of the bank until you borrow enough that they become afraid of you. And I think it'd be sort of nice not to tank the banks or put anyone out of business or hurt anyone at all, but just as an expression of resistance and power, like, hey, we have power too. We owe you money, and if we didn't pay you back, then you would have to talk to us as adults and not just patronize us or sick your dogs on us, but you would have to have a real adult conversation, as adults do with each other. Each with their point of view, and we can reach a negotiation. But I think that would be great. I mean, I kind of love that idea. And I brought that up to a prominent conservative. Like, whoa, what? What? It's like totally fine to talk about, our political power. We all get together and vote. Well, I don't know. I feel I don't personally, because I don't have any debt, but I have in times of my life. I feel like people are way more oppressed by their credit card debt than by anything else, actually. If we're being honest about it, which no one ever is. I mean, it's way easier to talk about your sex life than it is about your spending habits and your debt. Like, no one ever talks about. Every time I'm in an airport, somebody's like talking about like this crazy sex life, or two women are like, I can't. I'm like, whoa, I don't want to hear it. I've never one time been in an airport and they're like two college roommates being like, yeah, I'm $30,000 in debt to MBNA and I can't pay. Not one time. I'm serious. No one ever talks about it. So it would be kind of nice to bring that to the question is, why? You lure me into this deal? Like, I'm responsible for not paying my credit card on time. I get it.
You recently visited Russia again.
I did, yeah. So deep is my commitment to Putin. Putin!
So how's the weather in Russia right now?
It's brisk.
Now,
brisk with a hint of totalitarianism?
And wait, so I got a text from Tucker. He said, hey, I'll respond to your other text. I'm going to Siberia tomorrow.
Yes.
Like, usually that doesn't go well. So how was all of that?
I swam in a Lake Baikal. The largest lake, 20% of the world's fresh water is in Lake Baikal. I've always wanted to see it. I love, evergreens. I love pines and spruce and birch, and I love cold, fresh water. So I've always wanted, like, passionately. And I sauna every day. So I always have wanted to get out of the sauna and dive into Lake Baikal naked, and I did. So, life goal fulfilled. I don't know why. We all have goals. Some people want to make $1 billion. I have zero interest in that. Some people want, whatever weird things, some like car or whatever. I drive a crappy truck. I'm not interested in cars, but I definitely wanted to jump in Lake Baikal. That's not why I was there, but I did do that. It was a 14-hour round trip flight, but I pulled it off.
How deep in Siberia is that?
Don't get me going in Siberia, man. That place, I mean, so America's about, 3.7 million square miles, including Alaska.
Siberia itself is like 9 million?
Over 5.
That's insane.
Just Siberia. It's all of North Asia is a synonym for Siberia, and there are 12 million people in the entire place. There are 350 million in our 3.7 million square miles, and there are 12 million, and there are over 5 million square miles. So there's nobody there, and it's just pine, fir, spruce, birch, rivers, lakes. So if you like, let's say, Western Maine and the Appalachians, where I happen to live, this is like, it's at scale. So I love that. I don't know. That's not really relevant to anything. I don't know. I'm telling you this because I'm super excited.
But no, hold on. We're told it's barren. It's like there's almost this idea that it's just like flat tundra.
It's definitely not tundra. Well, by the way, it's so huge that, I mean, I flew over a lot of it in a helicopter, and not a lot of it. I flew over a tiny postage stamp size, but I mean, several hours. And at least where I was, it didn't seem, it looked very much like Maine or Finland or any kind of, northern conifer forest, which is my favorite landscape by far. Everyone wants to go to like the beach and look at a lone palm tree and like an endless expanse of ocean. I want to be in place where there are trees. It's one of my great interests in life. So, but that's not why I went. I went because we are on the verge of like a civilization-ending conflict with Russia, and I don't feel like people here understand it. And I'm just immune to criticism at this point because I just don't care. I'm obsessed with, because I have so many children, with, I want to get to January 20th. That's how I feel. And I just know, having lived in the country for 55 years, that there are truly powerful forces arrayed against that happening. And at this point, really the only way they can stop it is with a true catastrophe. And there are a couple I won't even mention, some obvious ones. But one of them is war with, the world's largest nuclear armed power, which is Russia. So they're really trying hard to do that. The Biden administration, acting through NATO and the government of Ukraine, they have been trying to do that for almost 3 years. And they're really trying now, which is, it's actually, people should be arrested for that. You can't have a guy win the majority of the popular vote in an election in which he said repeatedly, I will stop the war, no more wars. And then the second he wins the majority of the popular vote, a democratic mandate, you accelerate efforts to start a war that could very easily, in fact, it will, if not stopped, go nuclear and kill everybody. You should be in prison for that. We send people to prison for all kinds of things. Sam Bankman-Fried's crimes are nothing compared to that. Nothing. Assad's crimes are nothing compared to that. Iran's crimes are nothing compared to that. And I'm not in favor of Sam Bankman-Fried, Assad, or Iran. I'm picking bad people to make a point, which is nothing they've done approaches that in its recklessness or potential for mass death. So I don't even understand why people are just like in a dream state, in a fugue or something, like, oh, it's not happening. Oh, it's definitely happening. And so I just went over there in my autistic way, just like talk to their foreign minister. I asked
Sergei
Lavrov. I asked zero insightful questions. He's a good English speaker. I just opened the floor, let him talk for an hour and a half in the hope that someone would hear it and be like, oh, wow, that's interesting. This is
Summarize what he said.
He said, I should say, Lavrov has been he was a Soviet diplomat.
Incredibly sophisticated.
Yeah, he's like the longest serving diplomat in the world, longest serving foreign minister in the world. Has lived in New York most of his life. His daughter didn't even speak Russian. I mean, he's very familiar with the United States, having spent most of his life here and has a million friends here. Since February of 2022, he's been like a criminal or whatever, but he's got, he knows everybody. He's just a diplomat. If you're from Washington or on the east side of New York around the UN, like, there are diplomats everywhere. They'll know each other, and they're not that political. He's one of those. And he just said, they're accelerating this, and without being boring in the one sentence, the key misunderstanding of Putin is that he's a dictator with absolute power. It's an authoritarian country. There's no doubt about it. Less than some, more than others, but that's what it is. But the president does not have absolute power. That's just not true. In fact, no leader has absolute power. Stalin didn't have absolute power. MBS doesn't have absolute power in Saudi Arabia. People rule by consent. And Russia is especially complex because it's so big. It's the largest landmass in the world. It's 20% Muslim, lots of different republics, lots of different constituencies. And Putin is acutely aware of his popularity and of, dissent in the country, acutely aware of it. Here's the point. If there are continued attacks by the Biden administration on Russian soil and enough Russians get killed, they just murdered one yesterday in Moscow with a bomb, then Putin has no choice but to act in some way that shows his rivals in the military, his population in Russia, that he's not letting his country get taken over, that he's fighting back. You can't seem weak. No leader can seem weak without risking his job, period. That's just the truth. That's always true in every country throughout time. And so if Putin is made to seem weak, he will be forced to act. And I'm not defending Putin. I'm just noting what any honest person who knows anything about it will tell you. He's one of the most pro-Western people in Russia. Fact. And he tried to join NATO in 2000, whatever. The lying is so insane, it's almost not worth even pushing back against it. I'm not endorsing Putin. I'm just saying, if they end up killing Putin, which they've tried to do repeatedly, then you've got this nuclear stockpile that's 6,000 nuclear weapons. Where do they go? Who runs Russia? But this is like the craziest thing that anyone's ever done, and I'm filled with shame that my government has done it under Joe Biden. And he should have been impeached for it. People should have put a stop to this because he's risking the life of every American.
I have to interrupt. There's this contradiction, though. When you talk to some of the war hawks and you criticize the vertical escalation, at the core is actually this embedded belief that Putin is very rational. And they'll say, oh, no, Putin won't do nuclear war. He knows better than that. And essentially what they're saying is like, okay, we can do interior missile launches into Russia, but the war hawks say, but Putin will never actually respond in nuclear. So we're betting on the restraint of Putin, the man that we're told is a madman. That is the argument from the neocons in
It's
in
hard
DC.
for me at 55, having lived in DC since 1985. I finally fled, but I spent my whole life there. My dad worked for the government. It's hard for me to see the planners of the Iraq War, who I knew and worked for at the time, still have a voice in public. It's like, you should be ashamed, and you should have to atone for what you did. You killed all those million people.
It was a war crime.
It was absolutely. And they're still, because they have no shame, out there telling you that they know what's up and that they have a plan and that you should listen to them, and if you don't, you're a bad person. It's like how they still have moral authority is so shocking to me that I can barely deal with it. But let me just say this. The problem with countries is the same as the problem with families, and that is, when they're rich for too long, they get arrogant, and it produces hubris and incompetence. And that's why the third generation in any rich family is always drunk and driving the Maserati into the tree and going bankrupt. And you see the same thing in countries. If you're rich for too long, you get people like, Kamala Harris, or what, you get that Dan Crenshaw, these people with like no idea what they're talking about, who are so arrogant. Well, you don't know anything. You don't speak the language. You've never been there. You've never read 3 books on the subject. You're not wise. You can't even organize your personal life in a way that anyone would admire if they knew the details. Like, you're totally without accomplishment, and you're driving like decisions on which like the lives of the world hang. It's just crazy. It's a lack of wisdom, and wisdom begins with humility.
The fear of the Lord.
That's exactly right, which is itself both the product of and the way you get to humility. You can't have wisdom or knowledge of God or relationship with God without humility. It is the prerequisite. I am not God. I don't know what tomorrow brings. I mean, it says this in James. I was just reading it, but it's just true even if you're not a Christian. It doesn't matter your religion. It's just a fact of life. If you think for certain that you know what the future holds, you're an idiot, and you'll be punished for that. Period. Because you don't, because no person can know that, because you're not omniscient. So let's just start there. The law of unintended consequences has never been repealed. It is always in effect. And it's an effect in our lives, and it's an effect in our nations. I do this with my children, my wife, my job, also with my country, because it's always true. And I think I'm going to get this, but I get that. And then I get a whole lot of other things I never thought of. Like, that's just a fact. And it's true at the level of foreign policy as well. It's especially true, and then people die. So I just don't have any patience for that. Here's what we do know. We know that we are closer to nuclear war than at any time in history. We've had nuclear weapons for 80 years. They've been used once. The weapons used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were less than 100th as powerful as the weapons that all these 7 nations now possess. So everything is at stake. And anyone who would even risk that, like Dan Crenshaw or other morons like that, should be laughed off the stage, in fact, jeered off the stage. You have no right to have a position of authority because you are taking my family's life and putting it at risk for no good reason. So you can like seem cool on Twitter or get some job at, AEI or some stupid think tank, or like get accolades from Bill Kristol, or whatever your motive is. It's not good enough. It doesn't justify putting 350 million lives at risk. My life, my kid's life.
It is fundamentally pathological.
It's insane. And they're so racked with you, and I go through these thinking and I don't mean to beat up on Dan Crenshaw, the poor guy's in agony. Obviously, I mean, he's just got no self-control. He spends all his life on Twitter yelling at people. That's pathetic. But there's so many people, and then you think, well, maybe you're just evil, but I don't think they are all evil because I know them, and they're not evil. What they are is deluded by hubris. They really think they can control the outcome in a dynamic situation. You can't control the outcome with your wife. Nobody can. No, I'm serious. You can't make anybody do anything. You can't. You can't make your kids do anything. You can't make your wife do anything. You should be able to, I think. But you can't. You can't. You have to get buy-in from them. You can yell at them, shut up, I'm talking, I'm the man here. Oh, she'll get you for that. It's true. Fact. You want your wife to do something long-term. Like short-term, you can make anybody do anything. Pull out a gun, do it. But long-term, you have to convince them. Consent is required in leadership, period. And they've forgotten that because they've been preeminent in a unipolar world for so long. And they become idiots. And they don't realize, they're like, who cares what Turkey thinks? Well, okay, maybe in an ideal world, we shouldn't have to care what Turkey thinks. But we have to care what Turkey thinks because they have a big army. And look where they're situated on the map, Dumbo. They're on the med. You have to care. Russia, who cares what they think? They're a gas station with nuclear weapons. Okay, by the way, anyone who says that is a moron.
Immediately disqualified.
Yeah, they wrote Tolstoy. Okay, yeah, gas station. Not like gas station attendants write Anna Karenina, but whatever, shut up. You don't know anything. But leaving aside that, it's like, no, you have to deal with other people. If I said to my neighbors, I think I'm the coolest person on my block. I think I've got the best house, the hottest wife. That may be true or not, whatever. But I still can't tell my neighbor, not a word out of you. You know what I mean? I'm going to park on your front lawn, and if you don't like it, whatever, I'll shoot you. It's work for a day or maybe a week, but in the end, it's probably not a long-term strategy for having a neighbor. That's not how life is. Anyway, woo.
All right, Daisy, let's do some questions here. We have 15 minutes, then I have to get Tucker on stage, okay?
All right.
Hello.
Great.
Hey.
Hello, Tucker. I just want to say thank you for removing the legitimacy of the legacy media, especially for the people on the right. You shine the light on Fox News, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. I believe we see a lot of actors on the news networks and not necessarily journalists speaking their mind. I want to know how much control the news hosts have over what they say on the networks, and was there ever anything that you were extremely passionate about but could not talk about on air?
I have every incentive to be mean to Fox. They fired me or whatever. But I don't feel mad at Fox at all. I'm really grateful. But by the way, let me just say, I think every man who thinks he's successful should get fired at least every 5 years. And humiliated just to make sure you don't become a total unbearable douche, because you will if that doesn't happen. So my wife was totally thrilled that I got fired, thrilled. And it's not my first time, so I'd been through it before, getting fired. But no, but of course I have there are people I don't like at Fox, of course, but not really passionately. I feel sorry for people who are still not just at Fox, but that business is dying. No one believes them. They lied too much and they kind of blew up their business. Yeah, no, I agree. But I'm just being honest, no one at Fox ever told me what to say. And I was so cut off. I had an amazing, and still have the same staff. They came with me. They came, literally, I got fired and they all came. And I flew out with one of them today. So I'm grateful for that. But they kept me so insulated. But no one ever told me what to say, not one time. Not one. The only time anyone ever told me what to say is when they called me the morning last year and were like, you're fired. That was it. And I always said to them, and to their great credit, they went along with it. I was like, it's your channel, it's your company. I believe in private property, despite what I said about the banks. I actually do believe in private property. And it's your company. I'm just an employee. I don't own the company. If you don't want me to work here, you can fire me. Until then, I'm going to say exactly what I want to say. I'm never going to take instructions because I'm too old. But if you don't like it, just can me. And one day they invoked their option.
Let's get to the next question. Yes.
Hi, my name is Alicia Morales. I attend St. Mary's College, and I have been a lifelong listener. I grew up to listening to you in my dad's truck.
Your dad!
I was wondering, I go to a very liberal college, and if there was any advice that you have to give to a college student trying to put conservative ideas back on the college campus, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, there's no one better than Charlie Kirk, who didn't even go to college, which is so great. I mean,
we're an unrecognized chapter, so we're not allowed to be a chapter on St. Mary's campus.
You know, I mean, I think it's worth getting kind of aggressive. Like, you're paying money to go there.
It's an all-women's school.
Yeah, I mean, and the all-women's school, and I love, as a father of 3 daughters, like, I'm not really sort of pro-men at all. So I love the idea of pro-women's schools, I mean, of all women's schools, but they're all, like, the most insane. I don't know why that is. I've just noticed that. But I think it's important to say to them, look, you run a failing business. Once the Chinese wake up and stop sending their kids here, you're done, okay? You're scamming the US government with the loan system. My parents are like in debt to pay for this like worthless degree. And so you, as someone who's committing fraud, should be a little nicer to me and stop imposing like your insane, and by the way, totally unpopular views. And I just think you should be super direct with them. You know, you're paying for a service. And so they don't have, so much of life is figuring out who has the moral high ground. This is just the truth. And the one thing that liberals are super good, they're not good at anything, really. They can't build an energy grid. They have no idea how anything works. They're like helpless. You know what I mean? Call the super if something breaks. Like, they're just pathetic. But the one thing they're really talented at is immediately occupying the moral high ground and staying there. Like, I'm on the side of children, democracy. You know? Yeah, right. Democracy. Like, standing outside Planned Parenthood lecturing you about children. It's like crazy. But no one ever calls them on it. And so I think it's super important to say to them, look, you have no legitimacy. You're a criminal. And I'm in charge now because I'm paying for this. And so you're my employee. So I'm not going to lord it over you or make fun of you or whatever, but you better obey. Because what you're doing is really wrong. And if you just say that calmly and smile, I mean, you throw them off because they're used to like lecturing you all the time about everything. And I think we need to reverse that, not in a hateful way at all. And the last thing I would say is be cheerful. The divide is really between people whose lives are miserable. That's why they embrace the politics of death, and people whose lives are really happy and they want to keep them that way. You know what I mean? Because they have the right values. They have families and relationships with God and like meaningful work. They love nature and dogs, not cats. And no, it's just true. You can have a cat, it's totally fine. But like, if you're obsessed with cats in like this weird, morbid way, posting pictures of like a cat, I mean, a cat has an agenda, okay? And I've had cats and loved them, but if it's only cats, it's a problem, it's a sign. And that's not appealing to anyone, right? So you be the light. You bring the joy. That is more effective than anything. And they're like, "Wah!" You're like, just smile with your dog. You know what I mean?
Daisy.
Good evening, Tucker. My name's Henry, and 3 years ago, my father actually passed away. And when I got to see him on weekends, he was a very quiet man. Your show was actually the one area in my life that really opened him up. And it was the one thing that started conversation. So I sincerely, I have to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
My question this evening is, as someone who unfortunately is going to have to move to Washington, D.C., what is the area that our government can focus to help clean up the homeless problem there, as it's kind of threefold with drugs and the debt crisis, as well as just lacking social services, without the conservative perspective being kind of transitioning to that of the Democratic approach of increased taxpayer-funded social services, stuff like that?
I mean, stop paying for it is the truth. You know, as a sober person, a longtime sober person, I have true empathy for addiction, of course. And I mean that, I'm just saying that. And I've tried my best to help people with addiction, having been through it. So I have a lot, homelessness is it's a manifestation of addiction, right? Clearly. But overwhelmingly, not all, but overwhelmingly, you're looking at addicts. People are addicted to drugs and alcohol. And you know, stop paying for the drugs and you get fewer drug addicts. Don't allow the drugs. It's hard to keep drugs out of your country, but what we're doing is the opposite. We're just allowing them to flow in, and we're increasing, I think intentionally, the number of drug addicts. And first, you got to stop that. Second, you have to stop paying the NGOs to solve homelessness. The more money you send to the homeless representatives, the more homelessness you get, obviously. They're disgusting. They're poverty parasites. And you should say that. Speaking of no moral high ground, if you're a homeless advocate, encouraging people like the the denomination, I won't even name it, that I grew up in, all the tents in Washington where I spent my life that the homeless are living in are provided by, I'll say, at the Episcopal Church. And it's like, are you really helping homelessness? No, you're abetting it. You're making it permanent. You're causing it. And it's unfair to the homeless, but much more important, it's unfair to the people who live there, including me and my family. This is my view. I feel sorry for the homeless. I feel more sorry for my kids. By the way, who has a right? Who pays property tax? Like, at some point, people who do the right thing, I think, get served first. I feel sorry for the homeless. I'm a Christian. I do think the least of these are a true concern for us. But I also think if you penalize people for working hard and paying taxes, then you don't have any society at all. And we need to say that and not be embarrassed. Like, no, you can't live on the sidewalk in front of my house. I'm sorry. No, how about no? That's how I'd put up with that in my house if I had, whatever, don't get me going. I don't want to be self-righteous about it, but I'll just say one of the reasons I left DC was the homeless thing, because it made me so mad to think of members of Congress walking from Union Station, which is the prettiest train station in the United States, totally destroyed by homelessness and drugs, and stepping over the bodies of their fellow Americans dying of fentanyl to go vote for Ukraine. And I just couldn't deal with that. That made me so angry. I was like, I'm becoming a hater. I have to leave. And I did. That right there, like, if you are paying for more homelessness, you are by definition not serving the homeless. And we should just say that.
We have time. We have 5 minutes, so let's try to get to 2 more if we can. So
Sorry,
please, no. This is the questions that need to be tighter. So yes, Daisy, where are we at? Okay, yep.
Hi, Tucker. Hi, Charlie.
Hey.
My dad wanted to know, when did you go from wanting to maybe keep your distance from Trump to openly supporting him?
Man, I don't know. I've thought about that. I was standing backstage at Madison Square Garden, and it felt totally natural. I was actually with Trump, and it felt totally natural and fun, and it was just great. But then I had this weird moment where I was like, wow, I can't believe I'm here. I'm speaking at a politician's rally. Boy, I've never done that in my life. I never thought about doing that. I've always looked down on that. I actually really dislike politicians. They're the one group where contact does not create warmer feelings at all. You always feel like, if I knew him, I'd probably like him. That's not true for politicians. It's like the more you know, the more you dislike. The deeper the creepiness is, are actually really bad, all of them. So I just couldn't believe I was there. And that's sort of the answer to your question. It was organic. I mean, part of it was the shooting. Part of it was the realization that, people always say, it's the most important election. This really was. Yeah. And I felt like if the cartel, Kamala Harris, I was never mad at her. She's just like some hapless chick who, fit the part. She couldn't even pronounce her own first name consistently. Like, she was, whatever. Kamala Harris is wrecking America. She has no idea what's going on in America. She's not making any decision. She's just like a sad figurehead. Same with Joe Biden, air quotes, assuming he even exists. And no, but the people actually running things, Tony Blinken, high on that list, those people are just flat out evil. They're risking nuclear war, and they cannot do this again. We can't have this. So then I decided, since I don't really work for anybody anymore, I was like, it just came naturally. And so I spoke at the Republican convention. I didn't have a prepared speech. I didn't even really think about it until I was standing backstage with like 2 minutes to go. And I was like, wow, I have to give a speech. And I mean, I always do it that way. I never write anything down, but I don't have a speech prepared for 5 minutes from now. But it's different. It's Charlie. I love Charlie. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm speaking to the Republican National Convention. I have no idea what to say. And it was crazy how easy it was. Yeah, because I really felt it. I really, really felt it. And part of it is I know Trump well, and Trump can be frustrated. It's Trump. But I kind of love Trump. I'm just being honest. And I don't have to hide it. I really do. I like him personally very, very much. And I just think he's brave, and I think he's great. So it wasn't as weird as it seemed,